Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cities by Steven. You're talking to Steven. In today's episode, we got quite the doozy planned. This is going to be kind of a different format from our usual Let's Plays on this channel. This is going to be kind of like a podcast format discussing how transit networks work in City Skylines and in the real world. Today's episode is going to be with my good buddy Ryan, who was a real transit planner for a major Canadian urban center. So he brings quite the extensive knowledge to the table on how bus networks work in the real world, along with other transit networks. So if you like the video, please hit the like button and subscribe so I know that you want to see more of this, and if we can bring Ryan's extensive knowledge on real-world transit planning to the game Cities Skylines. So before we get into introducing you to Ryan, I want to quickly mention that this episode is going to use a lot of the CSL map view mod. You're going to see it quite a bit as me and Ryan use this to plan out our bus networks. So one thing I quickly want to mention is after I recorded last episode, I forgot to mention while I was during the hard cut I had that we hit Big City, which is this achievement, and we unlocked a bunch of new stuff, which is great. And with this, we unlocked this new tile, which is fantastic. So we're going to do that. And we're going to also build a diamond interchange right here, which is going to help with our bus networks out from Mapleton to the rest of the communities in New Lancaster. So the last thing I want to mention before we bring on Ryan is that thank you to Dracart for the name Groundshake Excavations, which I've renamed Groundshake Excavations Limited, for the ore industry area out on the north part of the map. So that's a great name. I really enjoy it, and please keep the names coming. And I apologize for this little interchange here. I was struggling with it. I didn't know why it wasn't snapping together. But without further ado, welcome my main man, Ryan. All right, guys. So we're with my good buddy Ryan here. Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, glad to be talking. It's Ryan, of course, Steven's pal, and he's been invited onto the channel to sort of be a resident expert in transit planning. So I'm really glad to be talking.
So Ryan and I went to school together, and we talk probably way too much about stuff like cities and transit than normal people would. So yeah, we went to school together. And we're best buds. And Ryan, so the audience knows that you're not just my buddy. What's your qualifications?
Sure. So you know, mentioning that we went to school together, we definitely met at the beginning of our undergraduate degrees, and so we really got to see each other through those formative years of becoming the professional hat wearers that we are. And in my case, as you know, I went to school for geomatics and spatial analysis, sometimes referred to as GIS, and I'm going to take the moment to plug it here. It's Geographic Information Systems. This is the people that work with geographic data in electronic formats to produce maps. It's a form of a data science, so I'm creating visualizations, making decisions, and streamlining processes using geographic information through a digital medium. So over the 4 or 5 years of my studies, that tends to merge into a lot of different fields. Broadly speaking, it's from geography. The humanities was my specialty, talking about cities, talking about places, people, the interaction of people in spaces. But that would then eventually branch out more into urban planning, more fine-tuned there, and city and regional planning in general. So over the course of my degree, I did a lot of varied work, and then was able to move myself into transit planning with the municipal, with a municipal city in Canada. And so I had a bit of experience at the table where I was using GIS to help inform decision-making processes. A lot of the times the work that I was doing was passing from me up to my head transit planner, and then they would take that paperwork, those maps, those visualizations, that data, and bring it to a city councillor. And together, that's how decisions were made. So I'm really proud to say that the kind of work that I've done in the past has been the stuff that had the effect of moving a bus stop 10 meters forward or back at times.
Sounds minimal, but it is really important when you think about when you're walking around your city. Uh, Viewers, just look at exactly where the bus stops are and imagine like a 20-meter difference on where that bus stop is and how much that would affect traffic.
It's people might not realize the minute detail and attention that goes into every single facet of the city. And if something was not attended to, it's going to become on the docket to be changed because it quickly becomes an issue if something is not intensely poured over with deliberate thought. So, yep, I'm happy to say that if you live in a municipality or really anywhere that's planned by a larger authority, every single thing in your world, your physical environment, is shaped by a human interaction. And for better or for worse, those things are natural from human thoughts. So some of them can be greatly beneficial and some might be highly erroneous. And that's where opinions matter. And that's where a good transit planner, a good regional planner, a good geographer has a broad range of knowledge and can borrow on those things and make sense of place well to make it make work for you.
So I wasn't pulling your leg when you clicked on the video and you said when and it said real transit planner plans transit in city skylines. Uh, this man here has actually planned transit in cities, and so we used his experience to kind of plan the first transit in New Lancaster. Um, so what we did to do this is there's this mod on the Steam Workshop called CSL Map View, and it's great. So what you do is you just go into your options and you go into the content settings, I think it is, where all the mods are, and you're gonna pull up the mod CSL Map View, and there's gonna be two buttons. There's export and launch viewer. So if you don't want to launch the viewer right away on your computer, you can just click export and you can deal with it after, or sorry, you can go there after you're done recording or playing the game. But let's just say you launch the viewer. What it does is it creates these maps, which you're seeing on screen right now. And it's amazingly detailed. And when you launch the viewer, you can save it as a picture onto your computer. But if you're in the viewer itself, you can remove the bus lines, you can remove the train lines, you can remove any aspect of the map which you don't want to show. So that's what I did with Ryan. So I printed this off and I showed it to him, and I remember you said, Ryan, like, holy cow, this is more detailed than I thought it was going to be. And I was impressed with it too. I think I saw it on a YouTube channel, Biffa Plays Indie Games, and that was a while ago though. So I found this, when I found that video, I found the mod. Holy cow, what a great tool to plan your networks, whether it be trains, buses, and whatnot. So in the previous video, what we did is we built that intercity highway through New Lancaster, which was kind of planned from the beginning of when I started building New Lancaster itself. Just the way we originally designed the city was just to get the city kind of booming, and then we would build the highway connection through the city for easy transit. Once we did that, I sent Ryan the images which you saw, and then he kind of planned out preliminary bus routes. Obviously, Ryan has actually I guess it's not obviously, Ryan has never played Cities Skylines, but he's seen me play a few times, and he's watched some of the videos on this channel. And Ryan, what do you think of Cities Skylines?
What an interesting game, Steve. I am taken aback by how much Cities Skylines can replicate real world functionality. So I remember a few years ago, I had been playing SimCity 4. I think it was 4 or possibly 5 at the time. Pardon me, your viewers who might be are screaming out right now saying, yo, it's this one. And the functionality, it was meant to replicate, in that SimCity style, how a city works. It kind of gave you the taste of things. But in terms of fine detailing and, as I alluded to earlier, the minute decision-making processes that go into things as arbitrary as where you might put a tree on your corner really weren't in your control. But what I see when you play Cities Skylines is how much authority you get to make those decisions. And the fun part is if you're inclined to learn and you want to crack open some of the foundational texts of city and regional planning, you really have a chance to display them here and then watch the game let them flourish, because they have been the principles that guide city planners for years for a reason. And when I see these implemented in game, and already from the little taste of it that I'm getting for setting up this transit network, wow, what a really complex game.
It really is. And I think I sent you a picture of the bus hub, which I'm not sure if we've gotten to that point in the video yet. But there's a bus hub that's going to happen, and you said, "Holy cow, this is actually really beautiful." The like the image and the graphics, and it really is. I'm always taken aback by this game. As I've mentioned on the channel before, I started playing on Xbox just because the pandemic happened, and I was looking for something just to mindlessly spend hours in that wasn't Call of Duty, because that can get a little bit much sometimes. I found this and completely fell in love with it.
So you picked my career line of work.
Yeah. Ryan and I have spent countless hours just like walking around the city and like commenting about transit networks, like the big nerds we are, and looking at how cities are planned. And we're like, oh, it'd be so much better if it was like this. So I don't know if I mentioned this on the channel before, but I studied history. Ryan studied geomatics, which is a type of geography, I guess. Am I wrong in saying that?
Oh, I think I could sign off on
that. So it's like a match made in heaven. History and geography, those two subjects go hand in hand sometimes, in high school and stuff. So it's just a lot of fun getting to know you through geography and through city planning before we even considered doing this and before you even started planning bus networks for a career. But this transitions to my next question, Ryan, which is my favorite little note that I wrote down on our little list of topics. Buses, what you think?
What you think? What do I think? Well, I'd like to begin by stating my experience with buses. And by that, I'd say the first time I rode a bus. No, I have to joke about that because that would definitely be a classification of school bus. And I was riding that as of the age of 4 to go to school. And, that itself is a shuttle service that with dedicated stops. I think people would be surprised to know how much the planning of school bus routes is a lot like the planning of a municipal bus route, in that the stops that school buses make are actually designated to the city in a very similar way, in the way that they are coded and then accounted for and moved with deliberate decision making. But let's jump down the line a little bit. The first time I was on an articulated bus,
Whoa.
We're talking now two sections connected by what looks like a fancy little accordion system, very uncomfortable to negotiate through as the bus starts to move and you're trying to get to the back. I can only imagine for those with physical ability challenges how crazy those situations are. Articulated bus, I think the first time they showed up in my home city was probably 2008 or so, 2007. And that's when I had just begun taking transit to get home from school from time to time, or moving around town. And of course, this is possibly more detailed than your listeners care to hear, but for sure it's builds into the basis of my experience on the floor and then how that affects my experience when I'm at the desk. And so, the things that really matter when you take a bus. I remember at that age, being quite young, this was when you could text a phone number to see when the bus was arriving. You didn't have digital services like Google to look up when the bus was going to arrive. You didn't have these on-the-fly technologies that actually could track the GPS and let you know right there on your palm of your hand when it was coming. But the best you had was to go, do I see it coming down the road? No. Can I call? Did I miss it? I'm here 2 minutes early, but did it come here 3 minutes early? And you just don't know if it's already gone by. And those, I remember, being some of the most both frustrating but rewarding experiences of taking transit. It's kind of this a dependable part of your life that could let you down or could surprise you and really make your day. And that was so that became my first time taking public transportation, sort of as a young teenager. And then as we went on through high school, it really became a dependent part of my life, something I took regularly to get to and from friends' houses and from school. And then would later incorporate, using the buses when we went off to university as a really important part, because now I was in an environment where I didn't have access to a car. So my main way of getting around the city, and as your viewers are well aware, you live in Ottawa. That's where we spent time in university together. Ottawa is a very bus-dependent, heavy city. And in fact, it's as far as Canadian municipalities go, it's the largest one. People would be surprised to know this, but city of Ottawa, in terms of size, is spread much further than Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Calgary in comparison, despite the population being much smaller than the other four. So buses in Ottawa make a huge difference, and as we'll get to, they in fact we're solely dependent on them for a long time. So again, getting on those buses, queuing up, and the remarkable part, again, buses, what are they? Well, this was the first time in Ottawa where I got to take a double-decker bus. And boy, did I ever enjoy that experience. It's a shame they don't come around more often. They tend to be for commuter routes. And so there's not really much purpose to take them in Ottawa if you're living within the center of the city. But I think one of the most important details of transit is the enjoyment factor. Getting up on that second floor, questions of, again, mobility access aside, is such a wonderful experience to see your city from 20 feet up. That's a bit of an overreach. But from that taller position and looking down, you really get to see some wonderful details. It turns your transit experience into somewhat of a pleasure experience. It's just fun. And I know that it's I can recall, in fact, one time in the end of our first year of studies, hopping on the commuter rail line and just riding it back and forth because it was just somewhere fun to be. It was a nice sightseeing adventure for $3 that helped me prepare myself for an English exam that I'm sure I went on to do mediocre at. So buses, what are they? Well, they're everywhere. They're a way to get around. There's something that many of us have access to. And in a lot of places, a lot of nations that aren't in North America, they're actually focal to transportation. It's probably the most prevalent way of traveling intercity before cars are introduced for the average user. So I've had a lot of experiences taking them. I feel like that's a hilarious authority to state because good for me, I've taken buses. But buses, what are they? Well, they're pretty neat, and they're a series of vehicles with 4 to 16 wheels.
And they carry like 30 people. And then if you're on a bigger bus, 50 to 60, right?
So size of buses, a little more than that, actually. I think people would be, again, lowballing that number more often than not. So the standard, I think it's a 30-foot bus, probably carries 40 people or so when you consider standing space and the allowability rates for that. If anyone's ever come from some sort of like professional sports game or concert, you know that you've been packed in like sardines, probably 80 to a 30-foot bus, and that's a very strange feeling. But then the articulated buses, those go up not much more. They probably fit about 60 people or so, 60 or 70. And then the double-decker buses, they can do a fair bit more because they maximize seating space on the top level. So they probably go around, again, 70 for a much smaller size bus in terms of length, because they don't have to fit so much on the road. So yeah, variety of options there.
Yeah, and that gets to exactly what buses do, is they take cars off the road.
Yes.
And allows cities to flow much better, which I think you're kind of seeing as we're playing this game in the background here. You're seeing that all of a sudden what happened with the city that was so traffic dependent, there was so much traffic in the city. And then as I'm building these bus lines, you'll notice as we're panning across the city that the car usage goes really down. And I don't know if we've gotten to the hub yet, but once you see the hub, it's like, holy cow, there's a lot of people there. And those are people that aren't using cars. And
Steve, if you think to bring it up for your users on the screen, there's a really great graphic that shows the physical space that's occupied by different types of transit. I recently saw a Halloween-themed version that included bats as an option, which you can fit 150,000 bats in the equivalent space of about 30 cars. But for modes of transportation, if you look at a car, it tends to fit 1 to 2 users maximum for a commuter, and the space of about 4 square meters. Then you move up to a bus that now fits 30 to 50 people in the space of maybe 4 cars. So suddenly you've got such a reduction in available road space. Then you can look at rail and some other alternative options as well. Bicycles being one of the best ways, ultimately, and pedestrians, of course, to to fit people in space. So yeah, that'd be a great graphic to show users why buses are advantageous and why your city, immediately you're seeing the reduction in traffic.
I will definitely add that in, Ryan. Can you send it to me after we're done?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So that kind of brings me to what kind of I mentioned before is we've talked about buses, what to think. But cities with buses, like how are buses used in cities? So I grew up in the suburbs of Toronto, and buses kind of sucked. They kind of just went right down the main lines, and they would occasionally kind of go through like the main arterial roads of suburbs, if that's even like the correct term, like the main roads of the suburban areas to like the numbered highways, I guess, like Yonge Street, for example, in Toronto is just a major road. And I don't know what the exact term is for that, but like the roads that would lead to the main road would sometimes have buses. And when you're living in the suburbs, having to walk 20 minutes to just get on a bus isn't the best. But when you're talking about cities with buses, like you mentioned, Ottawa has the largest bus network in Canada. Is that right?
In a sense, yep.
Yeah. Buses are used throughout the city as kind of like rapid transit, and they're really efficient, and they're everywhere, and they come all the time. So, at what point does a city stop needing buses and starts needing mass transit?
That's a good question.
Trains.
So, these things are all geographies of scale, and that's a really common that's a great class title if you're taking your undergraduate in in regional and urban planning, is going to be geographies of scale.
I guess there's a few questions in there. So like how do cities that are just like residential areas, like suburbs, use buses, and then how do cities themselves use buses, and how do they get out of that?
So you've definitely identified a really interesting topic in mentioning your experience from transit as a suburban dweller, and that being the first and last mile problem. And so what buses aim to do is to bring you from as close to your departure as possible to your destination. And sometimes that means one bus can cover that directly. Sometimes that means connecting to a second bus to get closer. If you think about a car or walking, you would just take the most direct route. You'd take the series of roads that lead you there, but a bus is fixed to certain pathways, so you decide which is best. The first and last mile problem is how far is it from the piece of transportation you're taking on the beginning and end side to your destination and from your departure. So that means to say, Stephen, in your experience, when you left your house and you had to walk 20 minutes, that was a 20-minute mile. Not that it was 1 mile in distance, but it was that the distance from when you could leave your house to getting onto the transit network was an experience of 20 minutes. And then from there, maybe you were lucky to get on a bus and go somewhere where the bus met right up to maybe the front of a school, the front of the mall, and that was a short mile. It was probably a 2-minute walk to 4-minute walk. So what we aim to do at best case scenario, the best transit planning principles are a 400-meter walk, which equates to about 4 minutes, 2 to 4 minutes of a walking time for the average user. And as you can understand, or as it's quite obvious, your experience was not that. This was a very far walk. That's 20 minutes. That's absurd. Think about somebody who uses a wheelchair. Think about somebody who is blind.
The elderly.
Who is, yep, absolutely, the elderly, the vulnerable transit populations, which intersect a lot with the standard sense of a vulnerable population, but some certain considerations come into play here. And again, say a kid, right? It's not so easy to have a kid walk for 20 minutes. Yeah, that's a lot of directions to remember. But if the bus stops right outside your door, that makes things a lot easier and more accessible. Just like you would have taken the school bus that tended to come right outside the door. So when we talk about geographies of scale, the unfortunate side is that suburbia tends to circumvent notions of scale. And so I'll get into that by saying there's an issue in suburbs where they don't have the equivalent share of tax that a regular part of the city would. And by regular, I should say the urban or core versus peripheral part of the city. So when you fund the municipal services like public transportation, the people that pay a more proportioned amount for their work or for those kinds of works are the people that live within the city limits. And suburbs exist beyond the city limits as a way of housing people, but as an advantage for the builders, we've offset those costs by not servicing things with taxes. So what happens is when you build a suburb, and I think a lot of people who have lived in suburban environments in North America will experience this, is there are facilities that are lacking because they are built out of minimal tax benefit. So it's very hard to run extra transit lines in a pocket neighborhood community of a city because it has to require the councilors of other regions, people that have larger populations in more urban environments who are paying their taxes, to say, yes, I want my people's money to fund a bus line out in that suburb where people have left the city to go live into. And so what ends up happening is that those places don't reflect the scale that they are, because a suburb can grow quite large, but because there's not enough municipal tax coming in to fund things, necessary services to scale up with it, they end up being underserviced. And then hence what you see is people drive cars. People don't have as many public parks. People don't have as many libraries or schools. The distances between things grow much, much larger, and they're shared more communally in a way that is actually not beneficial. Generally speaking, in urban planning principles, you want to live and work and exist within an environment probably no further than a half an hour walk from where you reside. And so in a suburb, that just ends up not being the case. Everything you access, the groceries are on one end of the suburb and your school is on the other, and a walk between the two might take you an hour. And that's absurd. But if there's not the municipal income to create a city out of your suburb, then you're going to have the experience like you had, walking 20 minutes to get to that bus line. So the question of when do you go into higher modes of transportation? Well, it's all about density. It's all about scale. And that's where you'll see these things crop up in this middle of cities, because they meet the most amount of people in the smallest amount of space. And hence they have the easiest justification as far as a municipal planning decision-making goes. So those who are elected to allocate funds will find that to be a much more wise decision, and that will only further put people in suburbs into a position where they are not accessed or not serviced.
So that was a fantastic answer. Holy cow. So the way buses are used in these residential areas are kind of to use as like shuttle buses to the mass transit that leads into the city, right?
Yep, I would say so.
Yeah. So the kind of what we're doing in the city is you've made a few lines. No, I added a few more, just like collector lines, as you're probably seeing me put in right now. But like, so you've used buses to go from the suburban area through the cities or through New Lancaster. So like from Umber to New Lancaster up into Mapleton, because people that live in Umber need to go to work and they can't walk from the suburbs to work. So they need to take an express bus, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And
so,
go ahead.
So I'm thinking, Steve, maybe what I can do is I can walk your users through the decision-making process that I pulled in.
Yeah, please.
And that will reflect certainly the emerging between the real-world conditions of what would actually go into such a thing, and then the gamification of it. So obviously, I did this over the course of a couple hours. And it was a simplified version of it, but it'll reflect a lot of the same values. So let's go back to the first map that I got from you. This is our overlook of New Lancaster as the point at which we had just put in the inner city highway. And by we, I mean you. And now we're taking a look at our structure of our city as we have it. So what you've created was essentially a ring road situation where this highway now links through the inner city and then creates a circular path through Umber, then through the industrial parks, through Mapleton, and back to the inner city. And this creates somewhat of a clockwise and counterclockwise flow flow being a really common term again for budding geographers to talk about. And this was going to come up in a moment in my justifications as to what I'm looking for. So one thing that City Skylines as a non-user I can't necessarily know, and I wish was maybe possibly more world-like if it's not, is how people choose to live and work and where they do those things. I will disclaim that all decisions I made for the transit network were under the pretenses that anyone could live anywhere and work anywhere else.
And I think that's how the game works too. So
yeah. And that's generally not a real world condition, although it is somewhat possible. We just know that what it really works like in real life is the most vulnerable people are pushed to working anywhere that they can take work and then live in the most affordable regions. And the people that have the most money are able to live and work in the most convenient way. So when I made decisions for this transit network, I certainly looked at it as if everybody had an equal base amount of money and anyone could look and work anywhere, despite the logic or reason for it. So that just being a slight note that there might be, in a real world situation, more of a keen eye for demographic data that would help you understand, well, we might want to get people from Umber to Mapleton, but we just quite honestly know that that's not necessary. And you could just not choose to do that. Whereas in this simulation, we knew that we had to service every part to make this transit network comprehensive to the conditions of the game. So I will, from there, now explain sort of where I went about decision making. So the first thing that I did was I created a overlay of the major transit circulation. And on this, what I identified was the ring network of the highways, as well as one addition to it, which is the main artery of New Lancaster, the north-south artery. And that would then link up to the southern highway connection in New Lancaster that heads out to Umber and the transit park, or rather not the transit park, the industrial park. So with that, now I've got the principal transit network. And if you are keen to eat as much of transit planning knowledge as you can as you're listening to this, this is the kind of thing that becomes the main arterial of the body of a city. So if you imagine what is the heart pumping being the main downtown core, where the most dense people are, all the goods, the money, the services that come and that flow out, then this network, the first overlay that I've created, is the main arteries that lead from the heart and connect to all the vital organs. And our organs are Umber, our organs are industrial parks, our organs are Mapleton, and the different neighborhoods of New Lancaster. So that's the first thing I did, is just to see what is our principal network that we're going to work from. And so the decision here is that not every street is involved in this, because you want to actually channel transit onto certain pathways, and doing so actually frees up space on other areas for smaller and more diverse types of circulation. So we've got our first network set. From there, what I did is I just took scope of the most major and some of the minor departure and destination locations. And so what I've done is I've placed circles on the map. in a real world condition, again, this would be a more complex functioning, but nothing more than pushing a pin into a map on a wall to say, okay, this is somewhere where we know at 3 p.m. on Thursday afternoon, 400 people are going to pour out of and need to return home from. So there's certainly a reason to have transit service that space. And what this ends up looking like is a series of dots surrounding the line network that I've got on the major transit hub. So what I would be looking for from here is how to weave a bus network onto this transit line, or the system of transit lines, so that they cross, intersect, or scoop into their reach these different major destinations and departure points. And so to give your listeners and viewers some sense, major destinations and departures were the industrial parks, of course, each of those being the majority of where people are going to take buses to. You've got Industrial Square at the north end of New Lancaster. That was certainly significant. A lot of people are coming and going. The development on the east side of New Lancaster, we've got the park here, Memorial Park, named aptly for the Alexander Keith. And that whole corridor, north-south, generally being what we might imagine as like Park Lane in New York City, Broadway Avenue, New York City, the places that we want to densify upon. And then schools also became a big part of this decision-making process. Of course, again, in real-world conditions, and I'll probably tire your listeners by saying that over and over again, there would be many, many more nuances to pull into this, and as opposed to where I've put down what is maybe a 10 to 15 points of interest. On a municipal scale, that might be something in the order of 7,000 to 9,000 points of interest. So, certainly the scale here is much more gamified to be general. So schools and points of work were the major places. So now that I've got this series of lines and dots, I moved into the phase of trying to identify some preliminary bus lines. And so these would go on to become the recommendations that I made for you, Steve. And what I essentially did is made lines that took people from each part of town and generously wove them through the other parts of town so as to reduce the amount of time two routes were spending on the same trajectory. And so this was an interesting decision-making process, because what your viewers will see and on this map here is that the buses that departed from the north end of Mapleton going to the industrial parks lined up almost identically to the route that leaves out of Umber and going to the industrial parks. And it becomes a question of, should that just be one line all the way from Umber to Mapleton with more buses on it? Or should it be two separate lines so that someone from Umber will leave and only be able to go as far as the second industrial park to the east? Or will it go as far as Mapleton? Or maybe what you have is, and what I ended up recommending here, is a dedicated line that goes all the way from Mapleton to Umber, and then a second one that serves just from Mapleton to the two industrial parks. So if someone lives in Umber, you unfortunately get a little disserviced here, because your route to get to the industrial parks goes a little further. Whereas if you live in Mapleton, you're lucky enough that you don't have to wait for the bus to make the trip all the way to Umber and return back. And of course, these decisions can be manipulated by adding more buses onto each route. But that was the kind of thing that, looking at the two lines going, wow, they really overlap. How am I going to address that? Is it worth addressing? Is it going to actually create a headache for people or not? And so one of the main routes, probably the first route that I did lay, was the New Lancaster route connecting Umber to Mapleton. And this is what most cities would think of as their 1A line, their principal line that runs right through the heart of the city and doesn't get into the tedium of picking up people into the smaller neighborhoods. This is the line you want to feed transit users onto. And as we'll get to possibly in later videos, as I return back to speak a little bit more as the development goes on, this is going to be the first line that ends up turning into a larger scale of transportation, something like rail. So the 1A Umber through New Lancaster to Mapleton was the principal axis. And the secondary axis to this is the New Lancaster to the Northern Industrial Park line. And that itself takes a slower route. It goes through the city as opposed to taking the highway access. And it is a collector for people in New Lancaster who then would work in the Northern Industrial Park. So from there, what I had was four lines that helped to get people from where they live to where they work, and in return, with minimal need to connect to other lines to reach an end destination. And what I had done at that point then is I had circled and made note of the inner city areas, the Umber, New Lancaster, and Mapleton neighborhoods, where now is where you'd probably add in collector lines. And as you alluded to, and as you went on to do, is that's exactly what you implemented was lines that work to feed into the main lines, so that if you live in the middle of New Lancaster, instead of having to walk all the way to the principal access to get onto the transit network, you can now take a local bus that comes down your road, takes you to the principal access, transfer, and now you're onto the main line. So that is essentially how it works. And what that reflects is what is called as a belt and loop format, such that the main belt would be something like our 1A New Lancaster Umber to Mapleton line. That is the main belt. And from that belt, we make loops off of it, so that on principal junctions, there will be the convergence of several lines that collect people from smaller areas and bring them to the larger network. So this is all about funneling. We're always trying to bring smaller areas into the larger areas, and then have those larger areas then again in reverse disseminate and push people back out. Because if you spread everything equally across the city, what you get is more chaos. You want to channel in a certain sense and then accommodate that channeling so that it works effectively for you. So the next stage that I had here was I identified, let's see here, 6 principal junctions. And these junctions were the places where the transit networks link across each other, so that people would be trying to funnel to those areas, and you would want people transferring. You'd picture these as your intercity transfer modes. So you take the bus from the suburb to just the edge of the city limit, and then on the edge of the city limit, from there you transfer onto a faster intercity commuter line, and it'll take you right to your business office or right to your business park. And so these ended up being pretty well one per region of town, with the exception of New Lancaster, where we see 2. And that's what links the red and blue lines, as I've colored them in this map here, together on the north and south end. And so at that point, we had our network. We're ready to implement. And so I labeled them and colored them, and I'm sure those kind of changed in game. But what they became was the Umber to Mapleton Express. This is a bus that takes the highway from Umber to Mapleton through New Lancaster, that connects up to the blue line, the New Lancaster commuter, so that people could then get off and transfer into the city and take transit from there. So line 2 was the New Lancaster commuter, goes from the south end of New Lancaster up to the Northern Business Park via the arterial access through New Lancaster. And this was the kind of transit network that's perfect for lane dedication and transit and light signaling, and the types of things that we can nuance in a city to privilege its speed as it competes with the regular cars on the road without access to something like a highway to really zip through. And then the last 2 lines were the Mapleton commuter and the Umber commuter, and these are our dedicated commuter transit lines for people leaving out of their house in the morning, headed to work, and returning back from. Now, what's amusing out of this is shortly after I did this, I think I woke up the next day and realized, looking at the maps, I had actually missed something here. And again, this is a little nuance of the game where in a real world condition, I probably wouldn't have had this existing. But what I had managed to not do was connecting people from New Lancaster to the business park on the west side of town. So it was, what I realized was, if you lived in New Lancaster and you worked in that Western Industrial Park, you'd have a couple of options here. You'd either take the express line down to Umber and then transfer onto the Umber commuter line and take that north again. But what that would do is just fill up the spaces on the transit network in Umber for people that already live there with people from New Lancaster. So that's a bit of an issue. Or the other option you had was to go north from New Lancaster along the New Lancaster commuter up to the Northern Business Park, and then again transfer and come back south. And that would again be a sticky situation, because now you're filling up the Mapleton and Umber commuter lines with people from New Lancaster who had no reason to actually go to that intermediary position. So what we wanted to see, and what I ended up sort of saying, hey, Steve, you might want to add this in, is a line that went west out of New Lancaster and north on the highway junction, and just met up right there with the Western Business Park, and that would be the last recommendation for a line. So that brought us to 5 principal lines with 3 inner city regions that would then be best served by loop lines, stuff that would collect people from the smaller neighborhoods and bring them onto this major access. So that was the decision-making process. Those are some of the criteria I considered. And then I think that brings us into sort of how you implemented it.
Yeah, so funny enough, Ryan actually hasn't seen the video of me implementing it because we're recording this before it's posted, so he hasn't seen it. So just for your sake, Ryan, what I ended up doing is I ended up just bringing the blue line that you had, and I just pulled it all the way up to that Western industrial area, so it's almost like a U. And then the yellow line, which you did, is instead of just making it stop a number and turn around and go back, what I did is I just brought it around, got on the highway, and then just looped back that way. But in that western area, which I think at this point on the map, you see it as Emerson. But we've actually changed that name in today's video to a recommendation. I created like a major bus stop in that area. So there's like multiple different paths that the buses go on, kind of like a bus station, I guess, in a way, but without actually building like buildings there. It's just roads. So that's because there's so many things that stop through there that it needed like a dedicated bus station, because it is a pretty massive industrial area and it's only going to grow. There's so much land there that's going to grow. And that's something that when we were discussing this is, when are we going to do this bus network video? Because like I've alluded to in a few videos, New Lancaster isn't going to be the highest density area of the city. It's going to be somewhere closer to the port. As you know, most cities evolve. This is going to be like the historical city with like some high density, but not fully high density. Whereas like the financial core is not going to be in the original city. So this is where we're going to get into multiple Transit by Ryan episodes as the city progresses and progresses out of its need of just buses, and it's going to need rail transit, subway transit, trams, even, or ferries. As the city's needs progress, the transit needs progress, and that's with any city, I guess, right?
Absolutely. And so it's interesting when you mentioned subway. I just thought it immediately really easy concept to point out for people is that why might I put in a subway versus increasing density of buses or above ground transit? Well, it frees up space, and that's really the name of the game. Playing city planning, and when I say playing, I mean the mental gymnastics of a city planner, are a lot like playing Tetris. You know, you see how when you play Tetris, the blocks come down and you go about fitting them together and you organize them and you go, oh, I really want the long piece. Come on, give me the long piece. And then you get it. And what happens when you get a row is it takes it out of the game for you. It eliminates it. And now everything falls down one level and you've got more space again and you can continue to repack. And as the game goes on, the decisions have to happen a lot faster because it starts sending blocks down at you much more quickly. And so you have to be doing the same processes you were doing, but on a much more rapid scale. So city planning is a lot like that. When you start out on a city and you're first putting in things like bus networks, what you're doing is you're trying to pack things in and fit things on top of each other to not spread out as much as possible. You want to really continue to use the space that you're on top of until the point at which it has to flow out and flow down, or it has to stack higher or spread. And from there, now again, talking about geographies of scale, well, maybe the bus network that you had that initially allowed you to put 1,000 people on a corridor in motion, now you want to flip that up to being a train line. Maybe it's going to have light rail, and that'll allow you to put 3x, 4x the amount of people on that same area. And that's that effect like Tetris, where it takes the line out now. It shifts everything back down. You just freed up space. Look at that, ta-da. Now you can take away those dedicated bus lanes because you don't have to have people on them anymore, but you've got a rail there instead. And it fits just as many, if not more people in the exact amount of space and then leaves you opportunity to put more growth in the spot where you once were occupying. And you do that over and over again. So subway is one of those solutions where you go, we've got nowhere else to go. Well, we could go down. And so that's what you do. And subways free up a lot of space like that. Of course, these things cost a lot more money. And so subways become cost prohibitive, especially if your geography does not permit it. But as we've seen in places like Montreal that have made really advanced infrastructure investment early in their development as a city, it has paid off incredibly. And I'll take this opportunity if there's really any dedicated Canadian listeners out there and folks who might be otherwise inclined to find this stuff neat. When the city of Montreal did put in their transit network, this was back in the 1960s in preparation for the Olympics and the Expo, all of the land that they took out from underground that they excavated ended up becoming 2 islands that situate on the St. Lawrence River between Montreal and the eastern shore of the St. Laurent. And so those islands now today house a couple of different facilities. They actually made space. They reclaimed land out of what they took out from the ground. And so we've got an amusement park out there now. There's a fabulous park, a public park that was the site of the Expo. They've got the Olympics took place as well, in part on that island. And those who would be familiar with the music festival Osheaga, that is a large draw for the community, is done on those islands. So what Montreal did is a 2 birds, 1 stone situation where they actually freed up space on their city road network and created further land for themselves to use and occupy. So A+ Montreal, I'm giving you a 2 thumbs up for decision making there. You did the right thing. 2 birds with 1 stone is always the way to do. If you're going to touch dirt, I'll make it worth your while. So that was a smart decision. So yeah, when we talk about scaling up, and as you're alluding to, Stephen, there will be the point at which certain parts of our network here will be upgraded to have more density, and certain parts of our network here will actually become, I want to say null or void, but they will have less of a reason to exist later on. And so this reflects real world conditions. The city of Ottawa recently just put in their light rail transit east-west Confederation line. And in so doing, their entire bus network changed. Because now, as opposed to feeding the buses from buses in the way that buses have to have more freedom on where they operate, but also have to deal with the restrictions of lanes on the road and access to other parts of the transit network, now they're feeding buses to the main commuter line, which is the rail line. And so the layout of buses within the city, for many ways, changed. And, people who live in their house and walked to a bus line that took them to the transit network, that probably didn't change so much. The pickup lines, the loops rather. But people who would originally have known the main belt lines to be 5 minutes from their door, heading in a certain direction, might now find themselves taking a completely new route that is oriented to getting them to the main transit line, the rail line, that then would disperse them around town in a different way. So the way a transit network evolves upon itself really can look and take a whole bunch of new shapes as the city grows and as the what you might consider the weighted core, the median center, or where those cores are, shift as transit is developed.
Well, Ryan, that is a heck of a tease for when the city's needs progress to the fact that we need to do this, and then we need to call upon your expertise to discuss how mass transit integrates into a booming city.
I'm looking forward to it. I can tell your viewers now that the authority that I have to make any decision makings here is already verging on null, and so I hope that I can bring into something later on in this development that is wise, but yes, certainly is very fun to think about.
Now, as we conclude this little interview, I guess, our discussion about transit podcast, I guess, I can tell you that by the time you hear Ryan next, the city's needs will have evolved too quickly for our schedules to do this again. So there will be networks that are being planned without Ryan. in which Ryan is going to completely scratch up and change.
Absolutely. And I look forward to sort of playing around with some of the the state of things as they are, because let's face it, in real world conditions, city planners aren't there for life. They do get hired in succession from one another, and there are several people, and city councilors come and go, and the way that funds are allocated aren't necessarily to the benefit of the city always, right? These are human decisions. So not to say that, Stephen, you don't have the, the best interests of your people in mind, but it certainly is the case that, like a real world condition, you will go about effectuating change in your city that might not necessarily be wise, and or might be exactly what is needed. And it's up to the people that come along then later on to look at the conditions and go, how do we move things from where they are? Because like a battleship on the ocean, changes in a city take a long time to turn. So you can't just ask the battleship to turn on a pin and take a new heading. It takes a very gentle movement of the rudder to start to move into a new way, and slowly people will change their lives, because it's easy for people to forget this when they maybe play a game like Cities Skylines or Sims or whatnot, is how much every second of every day is real for all the people that are affected by these decisions. So when we joke about making a bus stop 20 feet further or closer on a road, the reason those things matter so much is because it's someone considering the total hours of usage. It's considering, for every one person that uses it 3 hours of their day, multiplied by 365 days a year, multiplied by every single person that makes use of it, multiplied by the lifetime of that bus stop, it ends up being a large number very fast. And so the small decision you might make has a huge effect downline. And so when we look at a city that is well on its way, people depend on all the ways that the system is set up around them. If you were to just change everything overnight and re-put all the bus stops in a whole new way, it would seriously affect everything. No longer would people be arriving at work at the time they're expected to. No longer would people be able to access their groceries with the same dependency. Although it might work out just the same, you just can't change things overnight. So what it ends up being is like a series of flip cards, or like one of those flip books where you pull the pages fast enough and it slowly puts a picture together from flipping through them. What you do with a transit network is you kind of you start one of those. You're slowly making little changes upon itself, and you get it right up into the doorstep where you say, okay, now we're at the point where we can make no further little adjustments to this. We've massaged it to the point where we're ready to make one big overhaul. Now we're going to put in our transit line. Now we're going to put in our rail network. And from there, you start a new book. And again, you go about making little changes. So it'll be curious to see, Steve, where we get to, because like any good city, we know that decisions aren't always future forward. They're often very much reactionary and constrained by budgets. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that. And so I'm also looking forward to, Stephen, helping you maybe build in some more transit planning considerations. I'm sure for a future video, something to talk about would be the location of your bus stops.
We can go deep dive into that.
Yep, looking at where they're allocated, and looking at lane signaling, the types of real world conditions that we use to prioritize transit on the road, all the little factors that go into making our buses work for us.
Well, Ryan, that's a great send off for this episode. This episode brought to you by the Cash App. No, I'm kidding. But everyone listening, if you enjoyed Ryan's discussion on transit and you appreciate his insight, make sure you hit that like button and hit subscribe too, and get that bell notification on so you don't miss out on Ryan's next transit discussion video, where a real city transit planner plans transit in City Skylines. Thank you, Ryan, for coming on. And we're going to see you again soon.
Yes, thanks to everyone for giving me some space to talk. This has been a lot of fun, and I look forward to helping us build the better city that we're looking for here. And Steve, I have to say, I really love what you're doing with the city here by taking a theme. I think it's great that you're setting some obscure parameters for yourself instead of shooting for the stars. Doing things that reflect real world conditions, I think makes this a really fun process. And I really encourage everyone to hop on board and offer their ideas. It'll be fun to build this together.
Yeah, add some comments. Ryan will be monitoring the comments, and maybe he'll respond to some or through me, he'll respond to some comments if you have any questions. And shoot me a message and I can forward them to Ryan so we can get some insight if you need help with your transit or anything like that. So thank you everyone for watching. Make sure to hit that like button and get the bell notification on if you don't already. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe because it really helps out the channel a lot. Peace out, everyone. Post edit Steven here. Thanks again, Ryan, for coming on. Thanks to everyone who comments in the channel. I appreciate it, and this was a lot of fun to make, and I really looking forward to the next one that we end up getting to do together. Ryan's a great buddy of mine, and this was a lot of fun setting up and planning with him. So as we set up here, just to watch the bus station and all its crazy movement of the buses and all the people, I just want to thank you guys for listening to the episode 1-ish of Transit by Ryan in Cities by Steven. But I appreciate all your support of the channel, and thank you guys. Make sure to hit the like button and get that bell notification on so you don't miss out on the next episode of New Lancaster. Thank you. Peace out.